clipboard hit my porch with a slap that echoed louder than it should have. I stood there, boxes still stacked in my truck, not even 24 hours in my new home. And this woman, mid-40s navy blazer, sharp enough to cut glass, smile that never reached her eyes, was already telling me I'd violated community standards. My house sat 15 meters outside the HOA boundary. I had the survey documents. I had the property records. I had proof. But Judith Hathaway, HOA, president of Pinewood Estates, didn't care about proof. She cared about control. And when I refused to repaint my perfectly legal yellow house, something shifted behind that practiced smile. Something cold. Something dangerous. What I didn't know then was that my simple refusal would ignite a war ending with arson conspiracy charges and a 12-year prison sentence. And hit like, subscribe if you'd like to help the channel grow. That little thanks button down below means a lot. I pulled into the driveway just as the afternoon sun turned everything gold. The kind of light that makes you believe in fresh starts. My new house stood quiet against the sky, pale yellow siding, white trim. A small front porch that needed nothing but a chair and a cup of coffee. For the first time in 10 years of renting cramped apartments where landlords dictated paint colors and noise levels, this place was mine. 15 meters outside the Pinewood Estates HOA boundary. I'd checked the property survey 3 times. I measured it twice. This sliver of freedom cost me every dollar I'd saved from freelance writing gigs, but it was worth it. No rules, no committees, no one is telling me how to live. Miles climbed out of the passenger seat, his 9-year-old energy already scanning the neighborhood. The street curved, gently lined with houses that looked like they'd been copy-pasted from the same architectural template. Perfect lawns, perfect hedges, perfect everything. A wooden sign at the corner read, "Welcome to Pinewood Estates," in cheerful letters, and below it smaller, almost apologetic HOA regulated zone. I felt a small surge of satisfaction, knowing that sign didn't apply to me. My house sat just beyond the invisible line, free territory. Before I could grab the first box from the truck bed, a man appeared from the house next door. Late 50s, gray hair, cropped military short, wearing a faded flannel shirt, and an expression that seemed permanently set to cautious. He raised a hand in greeting, and I noticed the hesitation in his walk as he approached like someone who'd learned to measure his steps carefully. "Elliot Thorne," he called out. I nodded. "Vance Holbrook, your neighbor. Welcome to the block." We shook hands. His grip was firm, the kind that belonged to someone who had worked with his hands for decades. A retired engineer, he told me. I lived here 8 years. "You picked a good spot," Vance said, glancing at my house with something that looked like approval. "You're lucky. Your place is outside the HOA jurisdiction." He said it casually, but there was weight behind the words. A warning dressed up as small talk. I waited. "The folks inside the boundary?" He trailed off, eyes drifting toward a house at the corner of the street. Pristine white fence, not a single leaf on the grass. Flowers arranged in mathematical precision. "Well, you'll see." He didn't elaborate, just gave me a tight smile, told me to holler if I needed anything, and walked back to his house. The way he moved, quick, purposeful, like he didn't want to linger in the open too long, made my stomach tighten for reasons I couldn't name yet. I was halfway through unloading when she appeared. I didn't hear her coming. One moment I was alone, and the next she was standing at the edge of my driveway, clipboard pressed against her navy blazer like armor. Mid-40s blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful pearl earrings that caught the sunlight. Her smile was the kind you see in corporate training videos, professional, empty, calculated. "Good afternoon," she said, voice sweet as artificial honey. "I'm Judith Hathaway, HOA, president of Pinewood Estates." She extended a hand, and I shook it on autopilot. Her grip was cold. "We need to discuss some concerns about your property." Concerns. The word hung in the air like a blade. I set down the box I was holding, the kitchen supplies rattling slightly, and straightened up. "Concerns about what?" I kept my voice level, friendly. She consulted her clipboard, running a manicured finger down what looked like a printed checklist. "The exterior paint color," she said, not looking up. "Pastel yellow. It's not within our approved palette. The community standards require neutral earth tones, beige taupe, cream soft gray. This," she gestured vaguely at my house, her nose wrinkling slightly, "this doesn't harmonize with the neighborhood aesthetic." I felt Miles watching from the porch suddenly very still. "My house isn't part of the HOA," I said. The words came out firmer than I intended. Judith's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind her eyes. A spark of irritation quickly smothered. "Your property influences our community," she replied smoothly. "While you may not be technically within our boundaries, your home is highly visible from the street. It impacts property values. It affects the visual cohesion we've worked very hard to maintain." She pulled a thick binder from under her clipboard easily, 200 pages spiral-bound tabs color-coded. "Our Community Standards Manual. Section 4, subsection C addresses visual harmony expectations for adjacent properties." She opened it to a bookmarked page, turning it toward me like evidence in a trial. I didn't take the binder. "I'm not adjacent. I'm outside your jurisdiction." Judith's smile finally cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to let me see the steel underneath. "Mr. Thorne," she said, voice dropping half an octave, losing the honey sweetness, "I've been managing this community for 6 years. I understand you're new here, so let me help you understand how things work. Cooperation makes everyone's life easier. Resistance." She paused, letting the words settle. "Resistance makes things complicated, expensive, unpleasant." The threat wasn't even veiled. It was right there hanging between us like smoke. Behind her I noticed the logo on her clipboard, Hathaway and Associates Attorneys at Law. Of course. "I appreciate you stopping by," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "but I'm not repainting my house." For 3 seconds, maybe 4, Judith Hathaway just stared at me. The professional mask was gone now. What remained was something colder, sharper, a face used to getting its way, used to compliance. She closed the binder with a crisp snap, tucked it back under her clipboard. "You'll regret this decision," she said quietly. Not angry, not heated, just matter of fact, like she was reading a weather forecast. "This neighborhood has standards. People who refuse to respect those standards find life here very difficult." She turned on her heels, clicking against my driveway concrete, and walked away without another word. I watched her go, that navy blazer disappearing around the corner, and felt the first cold finger of unease trace down my spine. Miles appeared at my elbow. "Dad," his voice was small, "is she going to make us leave?" I put a hand on his shoulder, squeezed. "No, buddy, this is our house. She can't touch it." But as I said it, I noticed something I'd missed before. Judith's clipboard, that law firm logo. And the way Vance had looked at that perfect corner house, not with admiration, but with something closer to fear. The sun was setting now, gold light fading to amber, and the shadows on my yellow house looked longer than they should. Deeper. I told myself I was overthinking it. Told myself one angry HOA president couldn't actually do anything to someone outside her jurisdiction. I told myself a lot of things that evening. All of them are wrong. 3 days. That's how long it took for the first letter to arrive. I found it wedged in my mailbox between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer, crisp white envelope. No return address, my name typed in perfect alignment. Inside a single page on HOA letterhead. Courtesy reminder, exterior paint color non-compliance. Please contact the Architectural Review Committee to discuss corrective measures. Professional, polite, completely ignored. The second letter came the next morning. Same envelope, different tone. Official notice: failure to address exterior aesthetic violations may result in further action per Community Standards Manual, Section 4. By the end of the week, I had 5 letters stacked on my kitchen counter. Each one escalated. The third declared a $500 fine for willful disregard of community harmony standards. The fourth threatened legal action. The fifth, hand-delivered tucked under my windshield wiper, while I was inside making breakfast, wasn't even on letterhead. Just a handwritten note in tight, angry script. Outsiders aren't welcome here. Leave before you regret it. I stood in my driveway holding that note, early morning fog still clinging to the street, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't about paint colors anymore. This was personal. Judith started showing up in person, not knocking on my door that would have been too direct, too easy to document. Instead, she appeared at random times throughout the day, always with that clipboard, always taking notes. I'd look out my window while writing and see her on the sidewalk photographing my house from different angles, measuring my fence line with a tape measure, jotting numbers on her checklist, recording the times my truck pulled in and out of the driveway. When I took Miles to school in the morning, she'd be there standing by her silver sedan watching us leave. When we came home, she'd drive past slowly, her eyes tracking our movements like we were specimens under observation. The surveillance wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Vance mentioned it one evening when I was checking the mail. "She's been out here 4 times today," he said quietly, not quite making eye contact. "Taking pictures of your yard, writing things down." He glanced toward his own house, then back at me. "Same thing she did to the Pritchards before they moved. And the Kingsleys. Mavis planted roses the wrong color apparently. Pink instead of white. Judith fined her $2,000, then sent people from the HOA landscaping committee to walk through her garden every week documenting violations." His voice dropped lower. "Mavis is 71 years old. She cried when she told me about it. I asked why she didn't fight back." Vance's expression went flat. "She tried. Legal fees cost more than the fine." The phone call started that night. 2 a.m., my cell buzzing on the nightstand, pulling me from sleep. Unknown number. I answered groggily, expecting a wrong number, maybe a telemarketer with bad timing. Instead, silence. Not empty silence, breathing, deliberate. Then a woman's voice, muffled, disguised. "People who don't cooperate tend to have unfortunate accidents." Click. Dial tone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat up, checked the locks on the doors, and looked out the window at the empty street. Nothing. No one. Just streetlights casting yellow pools on asphalt and the distant sound of a dog barking. The call came again the next night. Same time, same breathing, same threat worded slightly differently. "Your son walks to the bus stop alone, doesn't he?" That's when I bought the security cameras. 8 of them. 4K resolution night vision cloud, backup audio recording. I spent an entire Saturday installing them. Front door, back door, driveway, side yard, covering every angle. I mounted a small sign on the porch, 24/7 video surveillance. All visitors recorded. When Judith drove past that afternoon, I watched from inside as she slowed down, read the sign, and her jaw tightened. She didn't stop, didn't take pictures, just kept driving. For the first time in a week, I felt like I had some measure of control back. Small, fragile, but there. The vandalism happened on a Tuesday. I woke up to Miles shaking my shoulder, his voice tight with fear. "Dad, come look." I stumbled out of bed, followed him to the front door, and stopped cold. Red spray paint, dripping down the white door in jagged letters 2 feet high. "Go home." My stomach dropped. Miles stood beside me, pale, his hands shaking slightly. I put my arm around him, pulled him close. "Go back inside, buddy. I'll handle this." But inside I was furious. Not just angry furious. The kind of rage that makes your vision narrow and your hands clench. Someone had come onto my property while we slept, while my 9-year-old son was 20 feet away in his bedroom. Crossed the line from harassment to actual crime. I called the police. Officer Brennan showed up 40 minutes later, took photos, wrote a report. He was professional, thorough, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. Without witnesses or camera footage of the actual incident, he said, clicking his pen, "There's not much we can pursue. Could have been kids, could have been random vandalism. I'll file the report and we'll increase patrols in the area." He glanced at my security cameras newly installed. Shame they weren't up a few days earlier. I didn't mention the threatening calls, didn't mention Judith's surveillance. Something told me it wouldn't matter, not yet, not without proof she was directly involved. She showed up an hour after the police left. I was scrubbing red paint off my door with turpentine knuckles raw when I heard footsteps on the driveway. Looked up. There she was. Judith Hathaway clipboard, absent for once, hands folded in front of her face, arranged in an expression of concerned sympathy that looked rehearsed. "Elliot," she said softly, like we were old friends. "I heard about the vandalism. How terrible. Pinewood Estates is usually so safe." She let the word hang. "At least it was, before certain changes." Her eyes flicked to my yellow siding, then back to me. Funny how trouble seems to follow people who don't fit in. I stood up slowly, a turpentine rag still in my hand. "Are you suggesting I did this to myself?" Judith's eyebrows rose, all innocence. "Of course not. I'm simply observing that our community didn't have these problems until recently. Perhaps if you'd been more cooperative, more willing to blend in." She trailed off, shrugged delicately. "Well, I hope this doesn't happen again, though I can't make any promises. Once a neighborhood's reputation is damaged, it attracts the wrong element." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Elliot, that security system won't help if people decide you're not welcome. Technology can't fix social problems." She walked away, heels clicking, and I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of not throwing the turpentine-soaked rag at her back. That night, after Miles was asleep, I sat at my laptop and started documenting everything. Every letter, every sighting of Judith, every phone call with timestamps. I created a spreadsheet, dates, times, incidents, witnesses, took screenshots of the threatening texts I'd started receiving from blocked numbers, printed the police report, organized it all in a folder labeled evidence. Because that's what this was now. Not a neighborhood dispute, not a disagreement about paint colors, a campaign, systematic, calculated. And if Judith Hathaway wanted to play games with paperwork and intimidation, fine. I was a writer. Research was what I did. She wanted a paper trail, I'd give her one that led straight back to her, one that would bury her when the time came. I just had to be patient, document everything, wait for her to make a mistake. And she would. People drunk on their own power always did. The law library smelled like old paper and desperation. I spent 3 nights there, buried in state HOA statutes, civil harassment codes, property rights case law. My laptop screen glowed in the dim corner. I'd claim browser tabs, multiplying like weeds, precedent cases, legal definitions, jurisdiction boundaries. The research was tedious, methodical, exactly the kind of work that made my eyes burn and my back ache. But with every page, every statute, every court ruling I read, I felt the power balance shifting. Judith had her clipboard and her threats. I had something better. I had the law. And the law was crystal clear. Homeowners associations had zero authority over properties outside their recorded boundaries. No suggestions, no requests, zero legal authority. I found 3 cases almost identical to mine. Pennsylvania, 2018 HOA sued homeowner for fence height violations. Homeowner's property was outside jurisdiction by 8 meters court, dismissed with prejudice and awarded legal fees. Oregon, 2020 HOA attempted to enforce paint restrictions on adjacent property. Judge ruled it tortious interference and fined the HOA $12,000. Florida, 2022 HOA president personally liable for harassment campaign against non-member resident, damages awarded $47,000. I printed every ruling, highlighted every relevant paragraph, built a binder that rivaled Judith's precious manual. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was on a legal referral website under HOA dispute specialist. 5-star reviews, 15 years of experience, a profile photo that showed a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. We met at a coffee shop downtown. her briefcase already open before I finished ordering. "Elliot Thorne," she asked, standing to shake my hand. I nodded. "Tell me everything." So, I did. The letters, the surveillance, the phone calls, the vandalism, Judith's veiled threats. I showed her my documentation, the spreadsheet, the photos, the police report, the timeline. She flipped through it all, her expression never changing pen, moving across a legal pad in quick, efficient strokes. When I finished, she looked up. "This is good work. Detailed, organized. You've got a solid harassment case here. Possibly stalking depending on how aggressive we want to get." "How aggressive can we get?" I asked. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent years dismantling bullies in court and enjoyed every second. "Very. But first we establish your legal fortress. Document everything from this point forward. Every interaction, every letter, every sighting. Get timestamps, get witnesses. And we're going to need to go on the offensive request. Public records from the HOA financial statements meeting, minutes, anything we can use to establish a pattern of abuse." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "HOAs like this, they're usually hiding something. Mismanagement, financial irregularities, power grabs. We find it, we leverage it. We don't just beat Judith Hathaway, we will dismantle the entire corrupt system she's built." The security system upgrade took 2 days. I didn't just want cameras anymore, I wanted a fortress. Infrared night vision. Directional microphones capable of picking up conversations 20 meters away. Motion sensors on every entry point. GPS tracker hidden in my truck. Cloud backup with redundant servers. Every piece of footage automatically uploaded, time-stamped, and stored where Judith couldn't touch it. The installer, a guy in his 20s who clearly thought I was paranoid, whistled low when I explained what I wanted. "Man, are you expecting a war or something?" I looked at him. "Something like that." When he finished, I mounted a second sign beside the first audio and video recording in progress. Smile for the camera. Let Judith see it. Let her know I was ready. That same afternoon, I drove to the county assessor's office and requested the HOA's official boundary documentation. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses on a chain, pulled up the digital files. "Pinewood Estates HOA Incorporated 2018. She read off her screen. "Boundary survey filed March 15th, 2018. She printed the map. I spread it on the counter, traced the property lines with my finger. There it was. Official. Recorded. Legal. My house purchased in 2015, 3 years before the HOA even existed, sat clearly unmistakably outside the marked boundary. 15 meters of blessed beautiful space between their jurisdiction and my freedom. I made 3 copies, one for my lawyer, one for my records, one to frame and hang on my wall as a reminder. The real work started when I began talking to the neighbors, not the ones inside Judith's inner circle, the true believers who treated the community standards manual like scripture, the others, the quiet ones, the ones who looked away when Judith drove past, the ones who had learned to keep their heads down. I started with the elderly woman 4 houses down, the one Vance had mentioned. She answered her door slowly, suspiciously, peering through a crack that's held by a chain lock. "I don't want any trouble," she said immediately. Her voice wavered. I kept my distance, kept my hands visible, kept my tone soft. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to ask about the roses." Her name was Mavis, 71 years old, widow, lived in Pinewood Estates for 9 years. She invited me in reluctantly, her small living room crowded with photographs and porcelain figurines. When I asked about Judith, her hands started shaking. "She fined me $2,000, Mavis said quietly, staring at her teacup, "for planting pink roses instead of white ones. Said they violated aesthetic standards. I couldn't afford to fight it. My pension barely covers the bills, so I paid. Then she sent people from the landscaping committee every week. They'd walk through my garden with clipboards, measuring stem heights, checking for weeds, writing citations for leaves on the grass. Tears pooled in her eyes. I pulled out every rose bush, replaced them with approved white ones. I still have nightmares about it. I talked to 6 more residents over the next week. A postal worker who'd been sued for parking his RV on the street overnight cost him $15,000 in legal fees before he caved and sold the vehicle. A young couple who had moved out after 3 months because Judith's committee had cited them 17 times for minor infractions, mailbox 2, tall house numbers, wrong font, garden gnome, aesthetically inappropriate. An accountant who'd tried to run against Judith for HOA president and mysteriously had his candidacy disqualified on a technicality. Every story is the same: harassment, intimidation, financial punishment, fear. And underneath it all, a common thread: Judith's power was absolute because nobody dared challenge her. The legal costs were too high. Social isolation is too brutal, easier to comply, easier to submit. But I also found something else, a pattern. The fines, the legal fees, the enforcement actions, they all funneled money into the same place. Hathaway and Associates, Judith's husband's law firm. Every single lawsuit, every legal notice, every collection action went through Preston Hathaway's office. The HOA's annual budget posted in the community newsletter I found in Vance's recycling bin showed $85,000 in legal expenses last year alone, for a neighborhood of 43 houses. The math didn't add up, unless this wasn't about community standards at all, unless this was about money. A business model disguised as civic responsibility. Manufacture violations, threaten lawsuits, collect fees, rinse and repeat, and anyone who questioned it got crushed. I attended the next HOA meeting as a guest. I had the right even non-members could observe public sessions. The meeting took place in the community center, a small building at the edge of the development with folding chairs and fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. 12 people showed up, mostly board members and their friends. Judith sat at the head table, flannel folders arranged in front of her, that clipboard ever present. She saw me enter and her spine went rigid. For a second, just a second, something close to panic flickered across her face. Then the mask slammed back into place. "Mr. Thorne," she said coldly, "this meeting is for HOA members only. My lawyer had coached me for this. State law allows any resident to attend as an observer." I said evenly, taking a seat in the back row. "I'm not voting, just watching." Judith's jaw clenched, but she couldn't argue, not legally. The meeting was a masterclass in corrupt bureaucracy. Judith proposed expanding the HOA boundary to include adjacent properties for community cohesion. 5 of the 7 board members voted yes immediately without discussion. One, a pharmacist named Colette, raised a hesitant objection. "That's not legal without consent from the property owners," she said. Judith cut her off. "We're discussing it, not implementing it." Motion passes. Colette went silent, her face flushed. I watched the entire thing from the back, my phone recording audio in my pocket. Legal in this state, admissible in court. Judith didn't know it yet, but she'd just handed me evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. I sat through the rest of the meeting: budget, approvals rubber-stamped, complaints dismissed, Judith's word treated as law, and felt a cold satisfaction building in my chest. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her little kingdom was secure. She had no idea I was already laying the groundwork to burn it all down. The envelope was thicker this time, certified mail, signature required. The postal worker handed it to me with an apologetic grimace. He knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside, 53 pages of legal letterhead. Hathaway and Associates. The lawsuit was real. Judith wasn't bluffing anymore. I stood on my porch reading through accusations typed in dense legalese: public nuisance, aesthetic pollution, diminished property values, intentional infliction of emotional distress on community members. They were suing me for $100,000 in damages, demanding I repaint my house in approved colors or face mandatory demolition of non-compliant exterior elements. The language was vicious, clinical, designed to intimidate, and it was working. My hands shook as I flipped to the final page. 30 days to respond. 30 days to hire a lawyer I'd already contacted, file motions I barely understood, and drain my savings fighting a lawsuit that should never have existed in the first place. My lawyer took one look at the complaint and laughed. Not a happy laugh, the bitter kind. "This is garbage," she said, flipping through pages. "Half these claims don't even apply to non-HOA properties. They're phishing, hoping you'll panic and settle." She set the document down, looked me in the eye. "But here's the reality, Elliot. Even garbage lawsuits cost money to fight. Filing fees, discovery depositions, motions. We're looking at $5,000 just to get started. Maybe $15,000 total if this goes to trial." I felt my stomach drop. $15,000. That was most of what I had left after the down payment, my emergency fund, Miles's college savings. "Can we win?" I asked. She nodded. "Absolutely, but winning costs money. That's the game. They know you're not technically in the HOA. They're betting you can't afford to prove it." I paid the retainer that afternoon. $5,000 withdrawn from the account I'd promised myself was untouchable. The account is labeled Miles Future. Signing that check felt like swallowing glass. But I didn't have a choice. Judith had made sure of that. My lawyer filed a motion to dismiss within a week, attaching the county survey map, the property records, 3 precedent cases, and a strongly worded argument about frivolous litigation. We'd know in 60 days if the judge would toss it outright or let it proceed. 60 days of waiting, 60 days of bleeding money, 60 days of Judith smiling from across the street, knowing exactly what she was doing to me. The social media campaign started the next day. I didn't have accounts on most platforms, never saw the point, but Miles did. He came home from school, quiet, withdrawn, and wouldn't look at me during dinner. Finally, after I pressed, he showed me his phone, a group called Protect Pinewood Values, with 213 members. The top post was a photo of my house taken from the street with a caption, "This eyesore is destroying our community. Outsiders who refuse to respect our standards have no place in Pinewood Estates." 47 comments. Most of them are vicious. Some using my full name, others just call me that guy, or the troublemaker, or worse. Someone had posted a photo of Miles getting off the school bus, face partially visible. The caption, "Even the children suffer when parents make selfish choices." I reported the post. It got taken down. 3 more appeared within hours. Different photos, same message. The comments multiplied, people I'd never met, never spoken to, calling me entitled, disrespectful, a threat to property values. Someone claimed I had a criminal record. Someone else said I was renting the house illegally. Lies, all of it. But the truth didn't matter. The narrative was set. I was the villain. Judith was the protector. And 200 people believed it without question. Miles stopped asking to go outside, stopped mentioning school friends, started having nightmares. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to find him standing in my doorway, silent, just needing to know I was still there. The isolation was surgical, methodical. I'd see neighbors at the grocery store, and they'd turn away pretending not to notice me. The woman who had waved cheerfully my first week now crossed the street when she saw me coming. Someone left a flyer on my windshield, community watch meeting, discuss problem residents. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcome. The plumber I called to fix a leaking pipe said he was booked solid for 3 months. The electrician never returned my call. When I finally got someone to come out, a contractor from 2 towns over, he mentioned he had heard about the guy fighting the HOA and almost didn't take the job. "Bad for business," he said, not unkindly. "People around here, they talk." I spent 2 weeks like that, isolated, watched, drained, sitting in my house that was supposed to be freedom, feeling more trapped than I ever had in a rental apartment. Some nights I'd stand at the window looking out at the perfect houses with their perfect lawns and wonder if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, if I should have just painted the damn house beige and avoided all of this. Then I'd remember Mavis crying over roses. The postal worker lost $15,000. The The couple fled after 3 months. And I'd remember this wasn't about me. This was about every person Judith had crushed before me, every person she'd crush after if nobody stopped her. The knock came late on a Thursday, 10 p.m. I checked the security camera feed first, learned that lesson, and saw a woman standing on my porch. Not Judith. Someone older, nervous, glancing over her shoulder like she was being followed. I recognized her from the HOA meeting, the pharmacist who had objected to expanding boundaries. Colette. I opened the door. "I'm sorry to come so late," she said immediately, voice low. I couldn't risk being seen during the day. She was holding a cardboard box, edges worn heavy enough that her arms shook slightly. "I need to show you something, before I lose my nerve." We sat at my kitchen table. She opened the box carefully like it contained something fragile. Inside documents, hundreds of them, printed emails with Judith's name in the header, meeting minutes with sections highlighted in yellow, financial reports with handwritten notes in the margins, bank statements, contracts. "I was HOA president before Judith," Colette said quietly, not looking at me. 2019. I tried to run a clean operation, transparent budgets, fair enforcement. Then Judith ran against me. She pulled out a stack of ballots, old and wrinkled. She won by 7 votes, except there were only 43 houses in the HOA at the time. Somehow, 52 ballots were cast. I challenged myself. She had me removed from the board for disrupting community harmony. I stared at the documents, saw Judith's signature on emails discussing problem residents, saw budget line items for legal fees that didn't match the services described, saw contracts with her brother's landscaping company charging triple the market rate, saw evidence of embezzlement hiding in plain sight, dressed up as legitimate expenses. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. Colette's laugh was hollow. "With what proof she controls the records, controls the board, controls everything. I kept these copies because I knew someday someone would be brave enough or stupid enough to fight back." She looked at me. "You're fighting back, so here, use these. Destroy her before she destroys you." After Colette left, slipping out the back door, still glancing around like a fugitive, I spread the documents across my table. My lawyer had said to find the dirt. Here it was, not just dirt, a mountain of it. Fraud, embezzlement, election tampering. This wasn't just a civil harassment case anymore. This was criminal. I photographed every page, uploaded them to secure cloud storage, organized them into folders by type: financial crimes, falsified documents, correspondence, evidence. Then I called my lawyer. "We're not playing defense anymore," I told her. "We're going on the attack." She was silent for a moment. Then, "Tell me what you found." I did. When I finished, I heard her exhale slowly. "Elliot, this is bigger than harassment. This is RICO territory. Racketeering. If we play this right, we don't just sue Judith. We dismantle the entire operation. HOA, law firm, everything." "How long?" I asked. "How long until we can move?" She paused. I heard papers rustling. 2 weeks to file counterclaims, another month for discovery, 4 months, maybe 5 until we're in court. 4 months, 4 more months of this, of isolation and threats and watching Miles fade a little more each day. But at the end of it, Judith would face consequences. Real ones, legal ones, the kind you couldn't smile your way out of or buy off with dirty HOA money. "Do it," I said. "File everything. I'm done being the victim." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of corruption, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Small, fragile, but growing. Judith thought she'd broken me. She thought wrong. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and anxiety. I sat in the gallery behind my lawyer, watching Judith's legal team arrange glossy presentation folders on their table. 3 attorneys, expensive suits, matching leather briefcases. They moved with the confidence of people who'd never lost a case like this, probably because most people couldn't afford to fight back. Judith sat between them, posture perfect. wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed, "Respectable community leader." She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stared straight ahead at the judge's empty bench, hands folded, picture of composure. But I'd learned to read her tells by now. The tightness around her mouth, the way her fingers pressed together was just slightly too hard. She was nervous. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be routine. Judith's lawyers would present their nuisance claim. My lawyer would argue dismissal based on jurisdiction. The judge would make a ruling. Simple, clean. Except my lawyer had other plans. When the judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and a no-nonsense expression, called the case, my lawyer stood and immediately requested permission to present counter-evidence. Judith's lead attorney objected. "Your Honor, this is a motion hearing, not a trial. Counter-evidence is premature." The judge looked at my lawyer. "Counselor," my lawyer smiled. "Your Honor, the defendant wishes to demonstrate that this lawsuit lacks not only legal merit, but also good faith. We have documentation proving the plaintiff knows her claims are baseless. This goes directly to the motion to dismiss." The judge considered for maybe 3 seconds. "I'll allow it. Keep it brief." Judith's lawyer sat down, jaw tight. My lawyer approached the bench with a USB drive and a folder. "Your Honor, the plaintiff claims Mr. Thorne's property violates HOA standards and harms community values. However, county records show definitively that his home sits outside HOA jurisdiction." She projected the survey map on the courtroom screen. Clear property lines, clear boundaries. Judith's HOA zone outlined in blue. My house in white, separated by a visible gap. The plaintiff is the HOA president. She has access to these same records. She knows Mr. Thorne's property is exempt, yet she proceeded with this lawsuit anyway. The judge leaned forward, studying the map, looked at Judith's attorneys. "Counselor, can you explain the discrepancy?" Judith's lawyer stood fumbling slightly with his notes. "Your Honor, while the property may be technically outside recorded boundaries, it remains visually integrated with the community. The HOA's position is that aesthetic standards should apply to adjacent properties to maintain property values across the broader neighborhood." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Aesthetic standards? Based on what legal principle?" Silence. The lawyer opened his mouth. I closed it. I tried again. "Your Honor, this is a matter of community cohesion, protecting the investments of HOA members from external factors that..." The judge cut him off. "That's not a legal principle. That's a preference. Do you have any case law supporting HOA authority over non-member properties?" More silence. Finally, "We're prepared to argue that in trial, Your Honor." The judge removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose. "I'm dismissing the aesthetic claims. Insufficient legal basis. What else do you have?" My lawyer didn't wait for Judith's team to regroup. "Your Honor, there's more. We believe this lawsuit constitutes harassment and extortion." She pulled out printed emails, the ones Colette had provided. These communications, obtained from a former HOA board member, showed the plaintiff discussing strategies to force Mr. Thorne to comply or leave. In one email sent 4 days before filing this lawsuit, Mrs. Hathaway writes, and I quote, "If he won't cooperate voluntarily, we'll use legal pressure to make his life expensive and miserable until he has no choice." She handed copies to the judge. The courtroom went very quiet. I watched Judith's face. The mask was cracking. Not much. Just a tightness around her eyes, a slight flush creeping up her neck. The judge read the email. I looked at Judith. "Mrs. Hathaway, did you write this?" Judith's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client doesn't have to answer questions in a motion hearing." The judge's voice was nice. "She does if I ask them. Mrs. Hathaway." Judith stood slowly, smoothed her suit. When she spoke, her voice had that same honey-sweet tone from our first meeting. "Your Honor, that email was taken out of context. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to protect our community from individuals who refuse to respect our standards. Mr. Thorne has been hostile and uncooperative from day one. All we wanted was reasonable compliance. The judge stared at her. Your community standards don't apply to his property. You just heard your own attorney admit that. So, what exactly were you trying to force him to comply with? Judith's composure slipped. Just for a second. His house is an eyesore. It affects everyone's property values. Someone has to maintain standards, and if the legal system won't protect homeowners from people like him... She caught herself, stopped, realized she'd said too much. The judge's expression went flat. People like him, meaning people who own property legally and choose their own paint colors. Judith opened her mouth. I closed it. Sat down. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The judge turned to my lawyer. Do you have anything else? My lawyer nodded. We'd like to file a formal complaint regarding HOA's financial practices. We believe there's evidence of embezzlement and fraud that goes beyond this case. She submitted a second folder. We're requesting the court order a full audit of Pinewood Estates HOA records. The judge flipped through the financial documents. Bank statements showing payments to Hathaway and associates that didn't match invoiced services, contracts with inflated prices paid to companies owned by Judith's relatives, budget reports with unexplained gaps. The judge's frown deepened with each page. Finally, she looked up. I'm granting the motion to dismiss the nuisance claims. I'm also ordering Mrs. Hathaway and the Pinewood Estates HOA to produce all financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence related to enforcement actions for the past 5 years. You have 7 days. She turned to Judith. And Mrs. Hathaway, I'm fining you $5,000 per day for every day those documents are late. This court does not appreciate frivolous litigation or abuse of the legal system. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. Judith sat frozen. Her lawyers scrambled to pack their briefcases, whispering urgently to each other. I watched her perfect composure finally shatter just slightly, just enough to see the rage and panic underneath. She glanced back at me once, just once. The look in her eyes was pure venom. But behind it, for the first time, I saw something else. Fear. She was starting to understand that this wasn't going away, that I wasn't backing down, that her carefully constructed kingdom was developing cracks. My lawyer touched my arm. That went better than expected. I nodded, not taking my eyes off Judith. What happens now? My lawyer smiled. Now we wait and see if she's stupid enough to hide documents from a court order. Judith was, in fact, that stupid. 3 days later, my lawyer received a response from Hathaway and Associates. The HOA, they claimed, had suffered a catastrophic server failure that resulted in the loss of approximately 60% of their records. Meeting minutes from 2019 through 2021 gone. Financial records from the same period corrupted. Email correspondence deleted during a routine security update. The explanation was typed on official letterhead signed by Preston Hathaway himself, and absolutely nobody believed it. My lawyer filed a motion for contempt of court that same afternoon. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing. The fines started accumulating, $5,000 per day. Then $10,000 when the judge increased it for willful obstruction. Meanwhile, I hired a forensic accountant. Not cheap, cost me another $3,000 I didn't really have, but necessary. She spent 2 weeks going through what financial records were available, cross-referencing them with public documents, bank statements obtained through subpoena tax filings. What she found was stunning. Over the past 4 years, the Pinewood Estates HOA had collected approximately $320,000 in dues and fines. Of that, $240,000 had been paid out in legal fees and contracted services. Almost all of it to Hathaway and Associates, or companies owned by Judith's brother and sister-in-law. The math was simple. The HOA was a shell, a money laundering operation disguised as community management, and Judith had been skimming off the top the entire time. The story broke in the local newspaper 4 days later. I didn't leak it. One of the other residents did, someone who had finally had enough. HOA president under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The article was 3 columns front page with a photo of Judith leaving the courthouse looking furious. By that evening, it had spread online. The community group that had been tearing me apart suddenly went quiet. Then slowly people started leaving. Dozens of members quit in a single day. The posts defending Judith disappeared. New posts appeared instead. I always thought the fees were too high. Remember when she fined the Martinez family for nothing? This explains so much. The narrative was shifting. Finally, after months of being painted as the villain, people were starting to see who the real villain was. And Judith, trapped in a web of her own lies, was running out of places to hide. The rock came through my window at 1 a.m. I jolted awake to the sound of shattering glass, heart racing. Checked the security cameras. A figure in dark clothing, face covered, already disappearing around the corner. The message wrapped around the rock was clear: drop the case or drop dead. I called the police, filed another report, and showed them the footage. The detective took notes, but his expression told me what I already knew. Masks and darkness made identification nearly impossible. Male, approximately 5'9", heavyset. That described half the men in the county. 3 nights later, it escalated. Motion detected on my driveway at midnight. I pulled up the camera feed and felt my blood turn ice. A man, same build, holding a gasoline can, splashing liquid across my garage door. I dialed 911, voice steady despite the adrenaline. There's someone on my property with gasoline. Send someone now. I woke Miles, led him to the back door, just in case. Police sirens cut through the night before the man could light anything. He dropped the gas can and ran, stumbling over my fence. Officers found the can, and something better, a vehicle registration fallen from his pocket, registered to a Ford pickup, registered to Preston Hathaway, Judith's husband. By afternoon, Preston had been questioned. He denied everything, claimed his registration was stolen, claimed he was home all night, but Judith couldn't corroborate she'd been at a late HOA meeting. And the security footage didn't lie. The man's build matched Preston exactly. The watch visible in one frame, gold band, oversized face was identical to the one Preston wore in every photo on the law firm website. The detective told me they were getting a warrant. 2 nights later, the fire actually happened. The smoke alarm screamed me awake at 2:15 a.m. I smelled it instantly. Burning, chemical. I grabbed Miles and we ran. The garage was on fire. We burst into the backyard as neighbors emerged, phones out, calling 911. The fire department arrived in 6 minutes, excellent response time, but an eternity when your home is burning. They contained it before it spread, but the garage was destroyed. My truck, everything stored there, gone. Miles sobbed in Vance's arms, while I stood barefoot in my driveway, watching firefighters spray foam into charred rubble. The fire investigator found accelerant patterns within an hour. Gasoline deliberately poured and ignited. Arson, no question. The security cameras caught everything. Same figure, same build, same distinctive watch. And one critical detail: when the arsonist's mask slipped briefly, the camera caught a college ring. Large, ornate right hand. I'd seen it before. Preston Hathaway's class of 1994 rings. The investigator nodded slowly. We're bringing him in for attempted murder. Because that's what this was. Arson with people inside. Miles and me sleeping. We could have died. Judith had sent her husband to burn down my house with my 9-year-old son inside. The arrest happened at dawn. 6 officers' search warrant. They found shoes with dirt matching my flower bed, the gasoline can in Preston's trunk, fingerprints everywhere, clothing with accelerant residue, and when they arrested him, Preston broke, started babbling about Judith. How she'd told him to scare me, said I was destroying everything they'd built, promised they'd be fine if I was just gone. He implicated her in every sentence. Judith's arrest came 4 hours later. I stood across the street with 30 neighbors and watched police walk her out in handcuffs. She saw me, made eye contact. I expected rage, defiance. Instead, disbelief, like she genuinely couldn't understand how her perfect system had collapsed. The officer guided her into the patrol car, and Judith Hathaway disappeared behind tinted windows. The charges: Preston arson, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. Judith, conspiracy to commit arson, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, wire fraud, extortion. 7 charges total. Bail set at $250,000 each. Neither could make it. They'd spent the embezzled money on legal fees and expensive lifestyles. The judge ordered them held until trial. 3 months away. 3 months of Judith in a cell, contemplating how her quest for control had cost her everything. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. 60 people crammed into a space meant for 40, with 4 news cameras positioned in the back row. The criminal trial had become a local spectacle, not just because of the charges, but because of what it represented. Years of unchecked power, years of residents too afraid to speak up. All of it culminates here under fluorescent lights and the weight of legal consequences. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, miles beside me Vance on his other side. Across the aisle, Preston and Judith sat with their court-appointed attorneys, the expensive legal team long since fired when the money ran out. Judith's hair had gone gray at the roots. Her cream suit was wrinkled. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The prosecution opened with the security footage. 4 monitors positioned around the courtroom, all playing simultaneously. The figure approaching my garage, the gasoline can, the distinctive gait. The watch catches infrared light. Then the fire itself, orange flames erupting, the figure running the college ring visible for 3 critical seconds when the mask slipped. A forensic video analyst testified next, explaining pixel analysis, biometric gait recognition, comparative measurements. The probability that this is anyone other than Preston Hathaway is less than 1 in 10 million, he said, pointing to overlaid images showing Preston's normal walk matched against the arsonist's movements. Perfect alignment. The defense attorney had no cross-examination. What could he say? The DNA evidence came next. Gasoline residue on Preston's clothing matched the accelerant used in the fire. Soil samples from his shoes matched my flower bed composition, specific mineral content, specific pH levels, specific organic matter that existed nowhere else in a 5-mile radius. The forensic chemist walked the jury through each test, each result, each damning correlation. Then came Preston's confession. The detective read it aloud. Preston's own words. Judith said he was destroying everything we'd built. She said the lawsuit would ruin us. She said if he just disappeared, all our problems would go away. I was trying to scare him. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped taking notes. Just listen to a man admit he'd tried to burn down a house with a child inside because his wife told him to. Judith took the stand against her lawyer's advice. The prosecution hadn't even called her, but she demanded to testify, insisting she could explain. The judge allowed it. Judith smoothed her wrinkled suit, cleared her throat, and began. "I never told Preston to hurt anyone," she said, voice steady. "I was protecting our community. Mr. Thorne refused to follow simple guidelines. His house was an eyesore. It affected property values. Someone had to maintain standards." The prosecutor let her talk, let her dig deeper. "I had a duty as HOA president to preserve our neighborhood's integrity. People like him who think rules don't apply to them who come in and—" The prosecutor interrupted. "Mrs. Hathaway, do you consider burning someone's house down to be maintaining standards?" Judith's face flushed. "I didn't know Preston would do that. I just said we needed to handle the problem." The prosecutor pulled out printed emails. "Is this you writing to your husband, 'Handle that writer permanently'?" Silence. Judith's lawyer put his head in his hands. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdicts in a clear, unwavering voice. Preston Hathaway, guilty on all counts. Arson in the 1st degree, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. Judith Hathaway, guilty. Conspiracy to commit arson, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, wire fraud, extortion. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. The courtroom erupted not with cheers, but with an exhaled breath that felt collective. Relief, vindication. The weight of fear is finally lifting. Judith sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Preston wept. The bailiff led them out in handcuffs, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could breathe fully. Sentencing day was quieter, fewer cameras, just the people who'd lived through it. The judge reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the impact statements from me and 9 other HOA victims. Then she spoke. Preston Hathaway, you are sentenced to 15 years in state prison, no possibility of parole for 10 years. Judith Hathaway, you orchestrated a pattern of harassment, embezzlement, and ultimately violence. You corrupted a community organization meant to serve residents and turned it into a personal fiefdom. You are sentenced to 12 years with restitution of $250,000 to be paid to your victims. Judith finally broke, sobbed. I tried to speak. The judge cut her off. You had power. You abused it. Justice today is for everyone you hurt. Gavel down. Done. 6 months after the trial, I stood on my rebuilt porch and watched the sunset over Pinewood Estates. The new garage looked better than the old one. Insurance money, plus the restitution settlement, had paid for upgrades I couldn't have afforded otherwise. Solar panels on the roof, better insulation, a workspace where I could actually spread out my writing projects without tripping over storage boxes. Miles was in the front yard kicking a soccer ball with 3 kids from down the street, laughing, playing, being 9 years old again instead of the scared, withdrawn version of himself that had emerged during the worst months. That sound, his laughter, was worth more than any court judgment. The yellow paint stayed. I'd had the entire house repainted in the exact same shade, maybe even slightly brighter. Added window boxes with pink roses, the same variety that had gotten a 71-year-old woman fined $2,000. Planted them in Mavis's honor. She'd come by last week with cookies and tears in her eyes, touching the petals like they were something sacred. "Thank you," she'd whispered. "Thank you for fighting when the rest of us couldn't." I'd hugged her, this elderly stranger who'd become something like family, and told her the truth I'd fought for all of us. Because that's what this had always been about. Not just my house, not just my freedom, everyone's. Pinewood Estates looked different now. The HOA had been dissolved entirely, its assets liquidated to pay restitution to the 14 families who'd joined the class action lawsuit. A new voluntary neighborhood association had formed, emphasis on voluntary, with transparent budgets, elected leadership that actually rotated, and a standards manual that fit on 2 pages instead of 200. Colette ran it. The same woman who had risked everything to bring me evidence now worked to build something better from the ashes. Actual community instead of dictatorship, dressed up as civic responsibility. People painted their houses different colors, planted gardens that didn't require approval committees, parked RVs in driveways without fear of fines. Freedom looked messy compared to Judith's sterile perfection. It also looked alive. 6 weeks ago, the state legislature passed new HOA oversight laws, independent annual audits, caps on fines and legal fees, proper appeals, and term limits for board members. The lawyer who fought beside me testified, as did Mavis and the postal worker, 18 voices sharing trauma that became policy protecting others. Last month, I arrived at a prison financial literacy program to volunteer and saw her. Judith sat quietly, orange jumpsuit, faded hair, fully gray, face thinner. She watched as I taught about legal rights, consumer protections, and ethical finance. At the end, she hesitated, whispering an apology. "I lost everything because I couldn't let go of control." I replied calmly, "I didn't come for your apology. I came to teach rights, the ones you tried to take away." She nodded left, and I never saw her again. Leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and if you'd like to help the channel grow, that little thanks button down below means a lot.